Okay, let's dive into one of the biggest geopolitical stories that's happening right now, almost completely out of sight. We're talking about the shadow oil war. So it all starts right here in the Strait of Hormuz. And look, I'm not exaggerating when I say this is probably the world's most important choke point. Think about it. A huge chunk of the entire world's oil supply passes through this tiny strip of water every single day. If this closes, the global economy could literally collapse overnight.
But what you don't see in the headlines, what you don't hear in the diplomatic press conferences, is that there's a silent war being fought right under the surface. This isn't a war with missiles and jets. No. This is a war of shadows, sanctions, and secret oil shipments.
And that brings us to the central mystery here, what we're calling the sanction paradox. You see, for years, the U.S. has had these incredibly tough sanctions in place. The goal? To completely stop Iran's oil revenue. But the numbers just don't add up.
I mean, the gap between what the sanctions are supposed to do and what's actually happening is just massive. On paper, Iran shouldn't be selling a single barrel of oil. But in reality, their economy is still breathing, and it's all because their oil is still getting out. So who's the key player making all this possible? Well, it's China.
So that's the big question, right? If these sanctions are so strict, how in the world are they pulling this off? Let's get into the mechanics of how it all works.
Okay, so the first piece of this puzzle is something called the shadow fleet. And trust me, these aren't your average, everyday oil tankers. They play by a totally different set of rules. Or, maybe no rules at all.
So, what exactly is a ghost ship? Well, picture this. It's usually an older tanker, no big company branding, so it's already hard to trace. But here's the kicker. Its most important feature is that it can just switch off its satellite tracker. And just like that, it vanishes from international radar, free to smuggle millions of barrels of oil, totally undetected.
And the whole process is surprisingly simple, really. A ship loads up with oil in Iran, it heads out into the open sea. Then, boom, the tracker goes off, it goes dark. Now it can sail for thousands of miles completely invisible before making its secret delivery. But wait, that's just step one of the strategy.
From here, it gets even more clever. The next tactic is what some experts are calling the Malaysian pivot. Think of it like a giant floating shell game, but with oil tankers.
So here's how it works. You have these ship-to-ship transfers. Way out in the middle of the ocean, far away from any surveillance, an Iranian tanker meets up with another ship. They literally just pump the oil from one boat to the other. And that simple act, it completely breaks the chain of custody.
And this is where the real magic trick happens. As soon as that oil is on the new ship, it gets brand new paperwork. The origin, totally scrubbed. So oil that started in Iran is now officially labeled as coming from, say, Malaysia or somewhere else in the Middle East. And for a refinery in China, this clean oil is now legally identical to any other shipment they'd buy.
Okay, but think about this. You can hide the ships, you can fake the paperwork, but you still have to get paid, right? And that leads us to maybe the biggest secret in this whole operation. Because this isn't just about the oil. It's really about the money.
You see, the real power the U.S. has to enforce these sanctions isn't just military might. It's control over the global financial system. Almost all major international trade is done in U.S. dollars. That means the U.S. Treasury can see and block pretty much any transaction it wants.
So how do Iran and China get around that massive hurdle? Well, it's actually pretty simple. They just stop using the dollar. By trading in China's currency, the yuan, the whole deal happens completely outside the U.S. banking system. And if you're outside the system, the sanctions have no teeth.
Or, and this is even more direct, they just skip currency altogether. A huge amount of this trade is basically a modern-day barter system. Iran gives China oil, and in return, China gives Iran machinery, helps build infrastructure, or provides technology. It's a straight swap, goods for goods, and that leaves absolutely zero financial trail for the U.S. to track. So when you add it all up, the ghost ships, the shell games at sea, the secret financial channels, you realize this is a massive geopolitical gamble. It makes you wonder, right? Why are both of these countries willing to take such a huge risk?
Well, for China, the calculation is pretty straightforward. They need vast amounts of cheap energy to fuel their economy. And their argument is, hey, these are American sanctions, not international laws. But for Iran, it's much, much more basic. The shadow trade is their economic lifeline. It's literally about survival.
And you have to understand, this isn't a one-and-done thing. It's a constant cat-and-mouse game. The moment one loophole gets attention, a new, more sophisticated workaround pops up.
And as tensions around the world keep rising, you can bet the shadow trade is only going to get bigger and more complex.
Which leaves us with a really big, critical question. Is all of this just proof that these kinds of sanctions don't really work anymore? Can the U.S. ever really enforce them? Or are we actually watching the global order change right before our eyes, all happening in the shadows of the deep blue sea?